Hello, you lovely people, and welcome back to Sabbatical Stories. I'm your host, Bex Thomas, and for the final time this year, I'm coming to you from La France. The cold has blown in, and so my husband and I head back down under next week. I set up this podcast to inspire courage and normalise taking a break from your career, and I would love it if you could help too by subscribing, liking, and rating the show. It really would mean a lot. So, today we turn the tables, and I am joined once again by my good friend Liz, who takes to the interviewer chair whilst I share my sabbatical story. Join us as we take you on a journey from my defining moment in an 11-hour snow blitz on the M25 in the UK, to the glitz and glamour of Sydney Harbour, through 3 sabbaticals and finally to a life lived by design across 2 continents. We talk about how life-defining my second sabbatical was, why the first was what I call disastrous, and why I still needed a third, the challenges of a career crisis, how to use themes to create your best life, how to reverse engineer a dream, and why integration is where the magic happens. Deep down, you've tried, dig deep, search wide, enjoy your climb, it's all for you.
Well, hello, Bex. Welcome to Sabbatical Stories. It's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to sitting in the other seat.
Today we are turning the tables, and I'm pretending to be Bex. I'm doing my best to use Bex's silky interviewing skills because we want to hear more about your sabbatical story. And as this is exactly that, your story, why don't you tell us a bit about your sabbatical story?
Okay, well, it's actually 3 sabbaticals that make up the story. The first one was a disaster, if I look back, in terms of intent and how it was framed to enable the next chapter. The second one, much more of a intended career break and much more intentional, very much learnt from the first one to ensure for me that that was a successful sabbatical. That was initially about 6 months, but it actually went a bit longer to 8 months. And then the third sabbatical very much was used for me solo because the first and the second had been with my husband, but more as a sort of integration technique and planning sabbaticals. So those are the 3 sabbaticals that I've taken, which then of course led me to totally switching careers and leaving corporate and becoming a career transition sabbatical and career break coach. So my sabbatical story really is life-changing, and for me, using sabbaticals as I have and career breaks as I have has been absolutely instrumental into my husband and I designing our ideal life, executing a plan, and then really living that plan. So I'm very, very lucky and grateful every day that we live an amazing life by design that's been enabled really through the career breaks that we've taken.
And the career breaks or sabbaticals that you've taken, have they all involved travel?
Yes, they have. The first one was whilst we were emigrating. My defining moment was 11 hours stuck in a snowstorm on the M25 in the UK, and I thought there has got to be something more to life than this. It was dark, it was probably 4 p.m, it was snowing and horrific. That was the defining moment of us looking at, could we live somewhere else and somewhere hotter and warmer and go and explore the world? And so we emigrated in 2011 to Australia. And so our first sabbatical, not that we really thought of it as a sabbatical or career break, but was obviously the break in between me finishing with the UK business and starting with the Australian business. So that was simply traveling through Asia and enjoying some downtime and some travel between the 2 countries and emigrating. The second sabbatical initially was travel back to the UK to spend time with family and friends, some European travel as well through that, but also spending a period of time in France, which is where we had in 2008 bought a very, very derelict barn in the middle of nowhere. So yes, that included travel. And then the third sabbatical that, as I say, I took solo, that included period of time meeting up with two of my best friends, one who lived in Asia at the time and one who lived in the UK, and then a period of time just on my own traveling. I felt it was really important to have that sort of solo time as well. So yeah, that they all did actually involve travel.
So you talk about the motivation for the first one. Was there much planning that went into the first sabbatical?
No, which is probably why it was. And actually, I wonder whether it, if I look back, it was probably more of a long holiday. And for me, and in the work that I do, the differentiator that I always think about around a vacation or holiday and around a career break and sabbatical is time, and then also intention, so why you're taking it. And I think the first sabbatical that we took, there was zero intention. I mean, we didn't even think about the intentions around the holiday either or whatever. It was just, oh my goodness, we've got these 6 weeks between finishing with the UK and starting in Australia. Let's make the most of it and do a bit of Asia. What it did do is when we were planning the second sabbatical and the much longer and much more intentional sabbatical, I really did look back on those 6 weeks and think, do you know what, we could have done so much more. Like, it's a massive transition going from one, you've done it yourself, going from one country to another and emigrating. And I just think we could have positioned ourselves in such a better way to enter a new life and use those 6 weeks of having fun and everything like that through Asia and experiencing the travel, but also just by lacing a little bit of planning of how we kind of wanted to enter Australia and where we wanted to be and kind of what mindset we would want to be in. So when I look back, I used it as a bit of a, it was not very intentional, and I took all the learns and lessons from that into the second sabbatical.
We have done the similar thing. So, as you know, I took 12 weeks before I emigrated to Australia. I didn't think about it as a sabbatical. I just thought, well, I should have a break because I'm moving country and everything's been really busy and chaotic leading up to this point. But I also think that it was a long time ago. Did you say it was 2008? No.
2011.
2011. I don't know that either one of us would have had all of that lovely mindset coaching that we've been party to at our corporate jobs over the years. And now we know a lot more about mindset and intention and how to make ourselves happy in a way that back then it was just, there was so much momentum with the change anyway, I'm imagining. That's how I felt, certainly.
Yeah, I also think that corporates have come a long way as well. So with the support and the opportunity to have a relocation coach or a career break or sabbatical coach, corporates have come a long way from then as well, because we there was nothing really, we had our relocation package and that was it, but there was no sort of coaching or counselling or anything like that around that transition. And it's huge, emigrating, it's massive.
So you talk about your first break and how many learnings you took from that sabbatical or extended holiday, whichever way you want to look at it. How did you use those learnings to be more intentional in your second break and to prepare for that?
The second break, I talk about the pivotal moment being on the M25 in snow that made the decision to move to Australia. The pivotal moment for us taking a break, our second break, was I was promoted to director, and it had been my whole career mission and sort of goal to get there. And it was one of those moments where it lasted for sort of, a couple of days where I was super excited and, really happy and proud that I'd got there. And then it was a bit of a, oh, okay, is this it moment? I'd strived so hard and so long for this. And once I achieved it, it was like, okay, what's next? And so it made us start to think, what's next in career? What's next in location? What's next in how do we want to live life? All of that sort of thought process encouraged my husband and I to also start talking about whether we wanted to stay in Australia. It had been this whole roller coaster ride of we were on a 4-year visa and then we fell in love with the place, and so you apply for permanent residency. And my husband had fallen in love with Australia and even to this day would have probably stayed forever and sold up the whole of the UK, sold up France and moved to Australia and that being it. I wasn't in the same mindset. I Still missed my family a lot. I missed my friends a lot. I loved the life in Australia and I wasn't ready to give that up. I wasn't ready to give up the network and the friendships and everything like that we had created. So I knew that I didn't want to give Australia up, but I also didn't know whether I wanted to go back. I was in this whole I don't really know mode. The catalyst for the second career break was that whole, oh my goodness, we need to do something to land on what next looks like. I remember talking to my director at work, who was amazing. And she talked through the fact that the company that I worked for at the time had a career break policy. So you could take a period of unpaid time off and explore whatever was personal to you at the time. And so I spoke to Tim and my husband, and we landed on, okay, well, let's take some time off. He spoke to his company. They okayed 6 months. So we were really privileged to be able to have 6 months unpaid career break. We both had the okay from our companies that we could return to the company, but not necessarily the role. It would be a sort of similar role, but not the exact role. Because it was so intentional, and because we kind of knew that the reason for taking it was to land on what next looked like, it's then that I started to think, okay, how do we actually land on what's next? And what do we need to do? So the lessons that I took were, what could we have done in our first break to really position ourselves in a much better mindset to make that transition into Australia a bit more smoother? What didn't we do? And therefore, how could we frame this break to be much more successful, I suppose, in my terms, to be able to transition us to the next phase. The first part of that was, okay, could we live back in the UK? Okay, well, let's go and prototype that. So we had a month in the UK where we went back and we slotted back into our previous life and our previous community. It was very obvious to both of us quite quickly that that's not what was going to totally and utterly fill our souls for the next chapter. So
did it feel like a move back when you did that?
Yeah, I suppose in a way.
As opposed to a move forward into another situation.
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, there's a couple of things. The weather is massive. So both my husband and I hate winter and hate the rain and dullness. And you just can't get away from it in the UK. I mean, we were back in June and it was still shitty weather.
Yeah. Whenever I imagine you in flip-flops.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure it was exactly a feeling of going back. I think what was wonderful is that we loved the month there, and we still love all of the people, and we're very lucky to live where we do. It's one of the most beautiful parts. So if we had to, and for any reason still now, if you think about your parents getting older, or if there was a requirement for us to go back there, it's a beautiful, amazing place to be. Just for us, it just didn't feel like that's where we wanted our next chapter to be. So that's the reason that we spent a month there, was to see whether it could be. And we were like, no, we love coming back here and we want to be closer. And for me, it was all about the people. And I just wanted to not be 24 hours on a flight away. And I also didn't want to be a 1 week a year auntie, or, my brother had started to have children. I wanted to not just be the FaceTime person. I wanted to be able to see friends and family more than just that once a year and cram it into a 2-week holiday.
So you prototyped living back where you had lived previously.
Yeah.
Was there more prototyping as part of that second sabbatical?
There was. The next prototyping was, as I say, we had this derelict barn in the middle of nowhere in France to see whether we still wanted that to be part of the future. And so we prototyped that, and actually it surprised us, because I don't think either of us were expecting to fall back in love as much as we had with it. I don't think we expected to be as excited at the prospect of doing it up as we were. That we fell in love with. We're both suckers for challenges, and so we just saw it as a challenge, and we were like, this will be super fun. I think if we knew then what we know now, I'm not sure we'd do it again, but innocence is bliss, isn't it? So yes, we prototyped that, and we were like, we want that to be part of our future.
You've talked about the intention of wanting to make a life change and make some life-changing decisions. Were there other elements to the sabbatical that were different to that? So did you also take a break?
Yes, we did.
How did you approach that, and the blend of that self-work with fun and other aspects?
We very intentionally took 2 months at the end to travel and just be us and take everything that we had experienced through that month in the UK and then the months in France to really decide what we wanted and where we would land. And what travel did for us in that is it gave us the space, it gave us that sort of sacred time to be able to really dream and be out of any of that sort of BAU. We did it very intentionally with just the two of us so that we really could spend time exploring the questions that were on our minds around what's next and what it could look like. Having just random discussions over breakfast about what were the best bits of going back to the UK and the best bits of France, but what did we not want to miss from Australia. And it was very evident pretty quickly on, I would say, that we wanted the best of both worlds and that we still couldn't land on where we wanted to be full time, what we wanted to do. And so what we came up with is themes. So we came up with the theme of a full-time summer, because both of us, as I say, hate winter. We came up with a theme of freedom, because actually that's one of our top joint values. Like, we both so value our freedom, and that's freedom of time, freedom of location, financial freedom. And then our third theme was people. What do they say? It's a blessing and a curse, having all your favourite people on two sides of the world. Such an amazing community in Australia, and also all of our loved ones on this side of the world. So those were our three themes. And then we spent probably the last month travelling, just having fun, because we'd kind of landed then on what our three themes were and that we needed to build a life around that. But what we didn't want to do is spend the last month doing the boring stuff like planning. So we committed to just having an amazing time, having fun, and then that once we were back in Sydney, we would try and come up with a plan that ticked those three themes.
I love that. I love that you gave yourselves the space and time. A very clever friend of mine said to me that sometimes when you've got a challenge to work through, sometimes you can only work through it when you're not looking at it. And so not being focused on the question, that's also something that travel probably gave you as well, is that you can't be thinking you have to be present when you're traveling because you have to get on the plane or you have to get on the bus or whatever it is. So you're also giving you an opportunity to not be consumed by the things that you're trying to solve in that environment.
We were exploring South Spain and Portugal for that last month, and to be honest, we'd not explored that area before, so we really wanted to immerse ourselves in it and have fun. You know, the whole point of taking that time off as well was to have just real fun. We both absolutely love travel and we just wanted to immerse ourselves in it.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance between being present and mindful, but also trying to plan for the future. Would you have used a sabbatical coach for that sabbatical if you knew that they existed at that point?
Well, I certainly didn't know they existed at that point, no. Yes, absolutely, for sure. I think if I'd have known that they existed, 100%. I think what I would have got out of it was probably a very similar outcome, but just a lot quicker and more streamlined to get there.
Were there any exercises that you did when you were working through these challenges? Were you writing things down or did you give yourself any of that structure that a coach may have given you had you used one?
It's a super interesting question because on that sabbatical, I did no activities. What I did do and what I have done since the age of 12, I journaled all the way through. Tim and I talked a lot, and he definitely is not a journaler, but I would journal kind of our conversations and our chats. And what that sacred time when you're traveling does as well is allow you longer, obviously more time to be able to doodle and journal and just write things down. The other thing that I did is one of my intentions for this period of time was to learn something totally new. And so I set up a travel blog called Community Back Pocket, and I was absolutely adamant that I would teach myself web design, I would design it on the web, I would write. And so actually giving myself time to write and write about amazing places that we've been to. And the whole point of the travel blog was to advocate against tourism leakage and really very much promote staying local and keeping the money and the tourist dollar within that local community. And so just through my writing, I would go off on tangents and then I would think about something else. And so I'd start journaling about something else. So very much I journaled. Where the work came in for me and where the sort of, you talk about activities and things like that came in for me was actually when we got back to Sydney. So that was part of my integration technique of keeping that sabbatical alive and being absolutely committed to not wasting it and going, right, okay, we've landed on our themes, we've landed on what we want life to look like, and this is how we're going to make it happen. So that's where the activities came in. The other thing I do religiously and did all the way through the travel was meditate. Tim fishes a lot, so it gives me a lot of time to be in nature and literally just, not even guided meditation, but just lie very still in nature. And so a lot of my visualization, I think, came from that. So I would sort of lie there whilst Tim was fishing and think, okay, what do I want life to look like? What would an ideal day look like? What's my perfect day?
Yeah, so you're giving yourself the sorts of prompts that you would give others, but you're doing it naturally in nature, in a place where you feel at your best, I suppose, and at your most creative with your thought. Before we go on to your integration techniques, I want to hear a little bit more about the travel. I want to just hear you explain how it felt to be in some of those places that you hadn't explored before in Portugal and Spain. What were the highlights?
The highlight for me is always the mornings. There is nothing I love more than waking up in a different place where you don't know really what's around the corner and taking the morning to explore. Those are the highlights for me. Getting lost, not taking a map necessarily, getting lost down little alleyways. I've got an amazing friend called Neela who she talks about wonder walks, just going off first thing in the morning and taking in all of the wonder that you come across. So turning your phone onto aeroplane mode so that you can still take photos of all of the wonder, but really taking it in. And then once you're home, actually really then questioning the whole wonder and the walk and learning about things. We have subsequently been back to Portugal twice because we fell in love so much with it. For us, it was how fresh and how cheap and how unfussy the seafood was. Just to go and get a cracked crab for next to nothing, some toasted bread, half a carafe of vino verde and a pint of beer for not even 20 euros was just amazing. The people as well are incredible in Portugal. I feel as though they live like I want to live. Everybody's very kind. Everybody feels as though they've got time. There's this real slow, community-based feel to life. And that's for me just a beautiful way of living.
I'm going to bring you back to the end of that sabbatical. You talked about integration techniques. What do you mean by that?
So I had witnessed many people taking short or longer sabbaticals and career breaks throughout my time of being a manager and a leader in the business. One of my observations was, even though it was a longer period of time than a holiday, what seemed to happen was after a week, it seemed like a distant memory to them. Everything that they'd done, they'd experienced, the lessons learned seemed to, after being back in the sort of real world and corporate hustle and bustle, seemed to just disintegrate. And so I was really, really committed to make sure that this period of time that we'd had didn't just run away from us.
So what were the integration techniques that you used for yourself when you got back to Sydney?
It's a very good question, because I think they almost organically kind of happened. The two that were non-negotiable for me was I started to explore yoga and use yoga as really me time. My time on that mat was almost an anchor to the sabbatical. I started to explore yoga actually in the 3 weeks I had off in Manly before we left for our sabbatical, and I absolutely fell in love with it. When we came back, I almost used that as the anchor, that okay, once a week I commit to doing a yoga practice, and that time on the mat anchors me back to that sabbatical. So that was a really good integration technique for me. The second was around working with Tim, but him not really knowing that we were going to be doing the sort of mindset work and everything, because my husband, he's not that sort of person that will work through a with a coach or work through a workbook or anything like that. But I thought, do you know what, I can use this as a bit of a personal mission, that if I can work with him through to creating a plan, and if I can really commit to that, and I gave myself time goals. Okay, so I basically used my corporate experience around setting achievable goals, looking at timelines and knowing when I wanted it sort of done by. But it really was a bit of a sort of secret mission that Tim and I would go on this self-discovery journey to plan what the future chapter looked like without him knowing he was kind of doing it.
Is this when you got into vision boarding, Bex? Yeah, did that form part of this sort of future gazing?
Yes, I think what did more so was the visualization. When I was on sabbatical, whilst Tim was fishing, would meditate. What I did very much as an integration technique was visualization technique. So really visualizing what I wanted a day and a week to look like. The other thing was really exploring different modalities. So nature walks and medicine walks were a huge part of it for me. So having an actual question, working with somebody to facilitate that question, you going off on a medicine walk, and really medicine mirroring back and talking at you, the nature talking at you as to answering that question. So I started to very much explore different modalities, but really it comes down to my very logical corporate planning is how I then ensured that it was implemented throughout.
But you're using a very creative technique in visualization and being able to imagine yourself in these situations, and then coupling that with your corporate experience on the execution side, right?
Yeah, so very much using some creative and sort of spiritual practices, I suppose, but also around the logical corporate background that was so natural to me. The piece that I think served us so well was what I call reverse engineering. This does come from my corporate background. So having been in recruitment and sales, we reverse engineered everything from what you want to earn in your back pocket, all your targets. We reverse engineered all of that, and that's what we did with life. So we dreamt up what we wanted life to look like around these themes, and then we were like, right, okay, what do we need to be able to get there? We had fallen back in love with France. It was like, okay, could that be our 6 month a year European summer pad? Yes, but it's derelict. Okay, so how do we do it up? And that's where Tim, with his amazing skills and tradie skills, came in. He then came up with a figure. So with okay, if we don't want any kind of debt and we want to still be true to this theme of freedom, okay, how much money do we need to be able to live location independent, I suppose, but also how much money do we need as capital to be able to do it up? How long is it going to take? What do we need? All of these different things. So we basically reverse engineered what we wanted life to look like once we dreamt it up, and then put that into practice.
Well, I do remember some of the planning around the power tools that needed to be bought by Tim as well, around that time.
Maybe not that many. The other interesting thing, though, is I did give up my job. So 2 years into the plan, because one of the big things for me from an integration perspective is that whole reviewing things on sort of a quarterly basis. And you mentioned about the activities that we did when we were on the sabbatical, and I said I did them when we came back. One of my absolute favourite is the Wheel of Life, and that's where you have a circle and you cut it into 10 different things. So things like finance, relationship, friends, health, personal growth, career, fun. And once you've cut it into your 10 things, you work out on a scale of 1 to 10 where you're at currently on all of those aspects, and then also where you want to be. Throughout doing this, 2 years into our 5-year plan that we had basically worked back from, I realised that I didn't have enough time to be able to execute it. So my job was too demanding. The hours I was working were too long, and there's no way that to meet the 5-year plan, I could still be doing that role. And so I made the pretty difficult choice of shifting to a different role that was less demanding, less hours, but also, of course, less pay. That's what I did. I chose to make the shift so that we could keep to that 5-year plan.
Your 5-year plan, does that then end with the third sabbatical?
No, the 5-year plan was the exiting Australia. Most of it was around like cash, hard cash. So we had a goal of exiting Australia in April 2022, and we managed to do that. But the third sabbatical was, I wanted to have a month sabbatical or career break in between starting a new role. But my amazing network came through for me, and I finished my role on the Thursday, and I was meeting a contact on the Monday, and I started work on the Wednesday. But it was such an amazing opportunity that I couldn't say no to, and it was a 6-month contract. So I thought, you know what, I can do the 6-month contract. So I said yes. I did the 6-month contract. Then I was asked to stay permanent and go into a different role. So I negotiated to take 6 weeks off in between the contract and the permanent role. So that was my next sabbatical, just for me to review, were we on the right track? Was it what I want? Are we doing the right thing? And just sort of sense checking and double checking. And I wanted to do it solo, as I say. So I met 2 girlfriends, had a riot with them.
Where did you travel?
So I met my girlfriends in Thailand. I think we had maybe 10 days in Thailand together. I went back to the UK to see family for about a week, and then back to Australia.
How different was that, taking the break on your own as opposed to with your spouse?
Really interesting, because I couldn't wait to do it, and I was so excited about doing it solo, and I loved it, but I also missed him way more than I thought. Actually, it was a wonderful time to really, really confirm to myself that we are aligned, we are a team. And as much as, I long for solo time sometimes, a day or 2 days enough. I'm then ready to, share all the amazing stuff that travel brings with it with my favourite travel partner. So it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes it's that whole, be careful what you wish for.
When you're used to traveling with your spouse, and that's the person that you're used to sharing the great memories and times with, or making the great memories and sharing times with, you sort of look for them to be like, oh wow, look at that, and when they're not there, it does sort of make you miss them a little bit, I think. So Bex, you've lived in 3 countries, you've taken 3 career breaks. What was it about all of those experiences that inspired you to become a career transition and sabbatical coach?
I needed something that I could do being location independent. As I mentioned, one of our key themes is freedom. We knew that we were going to be in France for maybe 6 months of the year, but 6 months of the year would be back in Oz or traveling. So I needed something that could facilitate that. So there was a lot of brainstorming, a lot of research, a lot of me thinking about what I could do. How I landed was really working through Ikigai. I don't know whether you've heard of it, but it's the Japanese concept of, they call it finding your purpose, is around what you're good at, what you love, and what the world will pay for. And then at that intersection is your purpose, or, in my case, my career. It was super interesting. I honestly thought it would be travel. Everybody talks, don't they, about your passions and finding your purpose, and if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, and all of that kind of stuff. And I'd had 16 years in busy corporate, and I knew I wanted out of that. So there was a lot of research that went into travel, and I'd travel blogged when I was traveling, and I kind of knew that I didn't love that. I then stumbled across the Travel Coach Network and was like, oh my goodness, wow, you can do this. I'd heard of life coaches, obviously, and business coaches, but not travel coach. So I looked at that and I thought, oh yeah, okay, I could be a travel coach. And so I actually did do the travel coach course, the ICF course. I'm an accredited travel coach, which really does lend itself to that sabbatical and career break piece. There was a lot, and this is why I love what I do, because actually for me it took a long period of messy fumbling around to really land. And what I do with the people that I work with at the moment is just simplifying the process and being able to make it much more efficient and come to clarity quicker. But the two things I think that made me land where I have are Jill McLaren's Think, Plan, Live book. I absolutely swear by it. And the Ikigai approach. And by exploring those two things, of the parts of my corporate job that I absolutely loved was the career coaching. It was coaching individuals through moving from one career that they didn't love to another, or them finding their dream role, and really coaching them in the interviews. I loved the leadership piece. So I love coaching, individuals within the team and seeing their career progress. So the coaching bit I've naturally done for 16, 17 years, and that's the bit I loved. The sabbatical and the career breaks was an obvious piece, because I was like, oh my god, I've done this, and actually for me it's been life-changing. Like the sabbatical, that middle sabbatical, was totally transformational. So I can take all of these pieces and actually combine them into a coaching practice. I think what I love around marrying the career transition, the sabbatical and the career break 3 is that they are all so different. So I have individuals who I'm coaching in the lead up. They know that they want a sabbatical and career break, and it's imminent, but they don't know yet when. I've got clients who have been back off a career break for about 6 months, 7 months, and have suddenly realised, oh my goodness, a bit like what my real fear was, that I've suddenly, it's like this long distant memory. And they've engaged me because they've realised that they don't want it to be. And actually, how do they hold on to that, and how do they integrate it into life so that life isn't as hectic or what it was prior to the break? And then the very obvious transition, career transition. I'm in this job. I don't want to be in this job. I don't know what I want. I fell into this. I'm still here 10 years later. Help me work out what it is that I do want, and then how to get there. So it's so varied. And I think that's what I love.
It's so good to hear you talking so passionately about this. It's giving me goosebumps. You've found your ikigai, you've found your niche. I'm going to pretend to be you for a second now. I always end the conversation asking guests to share their top 3 tips for anyone who's listening who may be thinking about a career break or who is all ready to embark on one. What would be your top 3 tips for them?
Start with your why. Be very clear on why you want to be taking the break, and explore what you want to get out of the break. Because I think sometimes the overarching why, if you pick a little bit deeper and kind of peel back the onion, there might be other, areas that comes up. So I would say explore your why. The second thing is really ensure that then what you're doing on that break satisfies the why. I have had quite a few individuals who, when I've coached them through the sabbatical or career break, they've decided what they want to do on the break. So, for example, they want to go and climb Everest, just as an example, and then they want to go to a yoga retreat and learn how to teach yoga in India or whatever. But actually, when we unpick the why, and why are they taking that break, and what is it that they need out of that break, the activities that they've chosen absolutely don't marry with that. So it might be that they are absolutely exhausted and they are so burnt out that actually climbing Everest, who came up with that? But it's what people do. It's what, they've read an article on somebody who's taken a sabbatical and climbed Everest, or they think it's maybe what they should do rather than actually what they need to do. Just be sure that what you're going to do marries with your why and really satisfies what you need out of that break. And then the third thing I would say is the magic happens on your return. And the magic happens when you integrate all of the lessons, all of the time you've had, all of your reflections into life post-break. So it doesn't just stop. A sabbatical doesn't stop when you come back from, your period of time off from work or from your travels or whatever. The magic happens when you actually integrate it. And that's where the transition and the transformation and where it can be totally life-changing.
Thank you very much for your time today, Bex. Thanks for allowing me to interview you on your own podcast.
Thanks, Liz.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks so much. You take care.
Turn the other cheek, show them your smile. You won't believe things for a while.
Thank you for listening to this special episode of Sabbatical Stories, my story. I really appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to join us. We've one more episode coming your way until we actually take a break. A bonus episode that will tie all of our wonderful stories from season 1 together. Hit subscribe to ensure you don't miss it. Thank you as always to Aunty B at the Flaxen, my incredible, patient and talented producer. And I also want to give a special shout out to the incredible Joanna Coac, whose soulful blend of smooth vocals we are lucky enough to use throughout the show. If you're interested in sharing your story on Series 2 of Sabbatical Stories, then please do get in touch. DM me on Insta, sabbatical_stories, or I'm Rebecca Thomas on LinkedIn. If you'd enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could like and rate the show. And hey, if you want to make my day, leave a positive comment also. If you think a friend would like it, please buzz it over to them. After all, sharing is caring. Until the next time, take care and dream big.
Show them your smile, you won't believe things for a while. Taking matters into your own hands.